Good evening, everyone. This is the Town of Fairfield's Affordable Housing Committee meeting of Wednesday, January 12th at 7:01 p.m. Mark Barnhart, Director of Community Economic Development. We also have members of the committee, Steve Grathwall, Chairman, Carrie Mackover, Joanne Romano-Kazanka, Cindy Samarco, Gwyn Alperovich, Heather Dabrowski. I think I got everyone so far. And we also have several members of the public, including Herb, Lime Cooler, Bob Elwanger, Jackie Page, and our recording secretary is also on the line, Gretchen Gerthner. We also have Glenn Chowder of Planmetrics, our consultant. So with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mark. And I was going to say Robert's iPad might be Nancy, and there
That's
she
me.
is. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
So,
Okay, thank
welcome,
you.
Nancy. And welcome to everybody. Thank you for attending. We have a lot to cover tonight. Just want to remind you, because of the format, that only members of the committee will be allowed to speak and ask questions. However, if there are, if you have a particular question or item that you want to discuss, you can do in the chat. You can add it to the chat. You can email Mark or I, or you can raise your hand and we can try to acknowledge you if we have time. But again, the committee members will come first. And I want to start tonight by noting the passing of one of our prior members, Walter Dunn. I don't know, Cindy, did you want to say anything in particular?
Walter was just such an all-around great person. He was really a valued member of the committee, and I got the pleasure of knowing him just briefly outside of the committee, and he was just a very nice man, good family man. But struck me the most about him is he tried to encourage me to swim in Long Island Sound, because he used to swim the mile in Long Island Sound. I still haven't done it, but maybe we'll do it in his honor. Anyway, just condolences to his family. He was just a great guy.
And I agree. And like you, Cindy, I got to know him a bit outside of the committee too. And I really liked him. Again, nice guy and very dedicated to the work that we're trying to accomplish. And he's going to be missed. Okay, so with that, the minutes, I'd like to have a motion to approve. And then after that motion, we can take some comments if anybody wants to suggest some amendments to the minutes.
So moved.
Yeah, that was Joanne, and the second from, I think it was Cindy who seconded that.
No, I wasn't here for the meeting. I was actually picking my daughter up from college.
Okay, so
Nancy, I think you're on mute.
Yeah.
I'll
Yes.
second. It's Heather.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Heather. So does anybody have any questions, comments, corrections for the minutes? Because if not, we'll just move to approve. All those in favor then, say aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Those opposed? There's nobody. And abstentions? I'm assuming, Cindy, that you are going to abstain?
Yes.
Okay. And Gretchen, just a comment that you have the people who were present at the meeting in the minutes. If you could also add those members who were missing, who not in attendance, that would be helpful. Thank you. Next on the agenda is the election of officers. And we do this every year. I will say that I am willing to serve again as chairman, but I'm also willing for someone else to do that. So there are just two officers. There's a chair and a vice chair. And so, you know, I'll throw it open for nominations.
Steve, I nominate you to continue as chair.
Yeah, I was going to second that, so nominate him. So either one.
Thank you.
Steve,
Yes,
okay, I'm gonna put a fly in the ointment.
Yep.
Cindy and, what do you call it? Cindy and, I can't even think tonight.
Nancy.
Nancy's
Nancy,
terms are
yeah.
up.
Yeah, they're serving until they are replaced.
Right, but
And
we have new members coming in February, and I do believe we should give them the benefit of voting on the new officers. That's my thought.
I'm unaware that there are new members coming in February.
Well, from
So,
what I understand,
okay, so I'm sorry, this is Heather. So I would like to talk about this more too, because that makes sense to me to hold off the vote while our new members are going on, but can we talk, who are these new members and have they been identified?
I'm unaware. I don't know. Mark, do you know?
No one has approached me.
No.
So
That's
what is the protocol? Like, I know that I came in for someone who moved out of town. And so that's how I came onto the committee. I think, Gwen came on the committee, in similar circumstances, different,
Yeah.
same fashion, different circumstances. So I think it's important before we take such a vote that we understand, is the committee going to change in 2 weeks? Because, we want to make sure that we're doing our due process and our due diligence.
my assumption is I came in February after the others, their terms were expired. So I would assume they're going to replace Cindy and Nancy in a timely manner. So
Well,
I'm
Joanne,
not sure.
Nancy and I's terms expired in November, and we agreed to stay on
Okay,
until we could finalize the affordable housing plan. So, we have been allowed to, or permitted to extend our, being on the committee.
okay, I was
For
just doing it
consistency.
because I saw on that, you were both listed as expired. So that was my thought process, was that when your term, I was not aware that you had it extended.
Well, I think Mark should speak to that, but I believe that we were extended.
Yeah, before
Okay.
Mark jumps in, that I do think that the continuity was important as we're trying to finalize the affordable housing plan. And so I did request that Nancy and Cindy stay on until an appointment was made later.
Okay,
And
I'm
Mark-
just going by what I was looking at on the website. And so that's what was my reasoning behind my motion.
The fact of the matter is Nancy and Cindy's terms did expire. They can continue to serve until a replacement is named.
Okay,
No replacement has been identified as of yet. So they
Okay.
can continue to serve until such time as a replacement has been nominated and approved.
Okay.
However, I would, recommend, and I don't, given the short duration of their current status, that, Cindy is currently the vice chair, and perhaps we should consider someone else, or perhaps just hold off on a vice chair until later. I mean, really, just from my standpoint, you do need a chairman or a chairperson
well, you have to have a chairman.
to organize and run the meetings. And then after that, then hopefully nothing happens to the chair,
Mhm.
because that's when the vice chair becomes important.
Right.
So
Okay, if we're gonna do it, and we're gonna do both
Yeah, bless
tonight,
you.
bless you, whoever that was.
Sorry about that.
If we're gonna do it- If we're gonna do it tonight, we have to take into consideration that Nancy and Cindy, their terms will be expiring, so we have to go within who's here long-term,
Yes.
Correct?
I would, that's my recommendation.
okay.
Well, let me be clear. So Joanne, you and Mark, you're in agreement then that Cindy should not, or Nancy should not be an officer because of
Right.
their duration is
Exactly.
unknown.
That would be just my suggestion.
That's,
Okay.
I mean, what do you think, Carrie? I mean, what do
Well,
you
I
think?
first,
Cindy?
I think if Steve's been nominated first, we have to call the vote on that, and then we can, that motion's been made and seconded, and then we can have discuss the Cindy issue separately. Cindy issue, well, whatever. I think
The
you
vice chair.
Sounds
I
like a
miss
movie.
you now.
Okay.
So maybe we could call the vote, or maybe Cindy as vice chair now.
Are there any
to call the
other
vote.
nominations from the floor
Yes.
for chair? How's that?
Okay, how's that?
Thank you.
Hearing none, can we have a vote on the nomination of Mr. Grathwall as chair? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oppose? Okay, I see that's unanimous. Are there any nominations for vice chair?
I don't, who's
Carrie.
interested?
I don't hear any, so we can hold off to Joanne's point. Perhaps at some point we'll have, and we can always have a temporary person if you're not able to attend the meeting. You can just reach out to another member and they could run the meeting on your behalf for that evening. How's that? Does that work? for everyone?
I've done that in the past. That's
Okay.
fine.
So with that, why don't we just move on to the main event?
If I may, I'm happy to continue as vice chair until someone else comes onto the committee. I just wanted to put that out there. I, have been chairman, have been vice chairman.
True.
I'm happy to serve in whatever capacity the committee, sees fit.
Sort of like on an ad hoc basis until the next person comes, is nominated. And,
Yes.
well, that works for me too, because then Cindy would be the person I would go to then automatically if I'm unable to make a meeting.
Okay.
Okay,
Works.
I mean, that's fine with me.
Okay.
I just was trying to go about it in,
Well, I think it was a good point, Joanne, especially if there was going to be new people coming on in February, but at the moment, for now, they're
I
not.
mean, we don't know yet, so we have to just assume that no decisions were made yet, so.
And Joanne, I agree. And I mean, when new people come on and Nancy and I, are no longer on the committee, I think you should appoint different people to represent the committee. But, for continuity, I'm happy to, do whatever everyone, or fill in whatever need I can do for the committee.
Right,
Thank you.
that's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
So moving on, we have, first of all, I see that Carol Martin has joined. Good evening, Carol, and Janice. Not quite sure who Janice is, but welcome. There's Carol. Good to see you, Carol. So Glenn is here to take us through the draft of the Affordable Housing Plan, and let's turn it over to Glenn.
Steve, thank you very much. And as was indicated earlier, Happy New Year to everybody. I prepared a first draft of the Affordable Housing Plan for the Commission's review. I think I tried to take all of our research, investigation, discussions, input and feedback into account. I remember saying to the committee at an earlier meeting that I was going to try to keep it under 30 pages. And as I got into the story and realized the number of issues afoot here that I felt were going to need some explanation, the number of pages started to grow. And so I think I just wanted to get that out on the table first, because I think it is possible to shorten the number of pages. or it may be possible even to create an executive summary of this document. But I think for people in Fairfield to understand the directions that the committee may want to go in, I felt the explanations was going to take this many pages. So I just wanted to put that out on the table so that you can keep that in your mind, et cetera, as we go. I think I laid out the plan with sort of 7 major components to it. The first is an introduction to kind of set the stage for what it is that we're doing, provide some background information. And I think this is kind of important. I tried to take a step back. I think many members of the committee you understand where affordable housing is in town, or the names or addresses roll off your tongues. But I think there's many people in town who aren't really familiar with all of these different aspects. And so I wanted to identify that information for people. And I think what that does is end up with a larger document. You will have noticed in the draft document itself that there are, bear with me just for a second here, there we go, some maps and other material. And I'd like to include those, and those end up taking up 2-page spreads.
Excuse me, Glenn, do you have anything that you want to share the screen for?
I do. I was just going to go through
sorry.
the table of contents first, Steve, and then bring
Yeah.
the document itself up.
Okay.
The third major part is an overview of current housing policies in Fairfield, both in terms of the OCD and the zoning regulations. The fourth part is to summarize the community input we've received so far. Fifth part is sort of our vision for the future, the overall goals and objectives of our work. And then 6 are the housing strategies, and 7 is implementation. So I've tried to lay it out as a story to be able to share this information with the community overall. So I think perhaps what I'd like to suggest as we start off and just kind of walk through for a moment the table of contents, and then we can start to get into pages, et cetera. Does this organization make sense for you in terms of telling a story? What are your thoughts on the way the draft plan is organized?
Well, I do feel, Glenn, that we do need something like an executive summary, something that the public is going to read. Only a few people are going to wade through the 54 pages. And we really do need something that they can quickly read and understand, what it is we're trying to accomplish. So
Yep. I'm very comfortable with that. I think some of the work I did with Stratford on their affordable housing plan, we ended up very much in that scenario. We ended up with a plan with a little bit more detail in it, and then executive summary, and most people do seem to gravitate towards that. So I think that's a good approach going forward. So the organization feels comfortable for people at this point in time?
At this point,
Yep, thank you.
But just one other thing, the strategies, the implementation plan, we'll talk more about it when we get there, but, I think that the way it was done the last time, Glenn,
Yep.
I felt was very good and easy to grasp. And only the goals were 2 pages, maybe 3 pages. And so you might look at what we did last time and see if there's a way to incorporate that towards the front more than in the back, so.
Yep. Thank you, Steve. I put a preliminary cover letter so that when the document is shared on the web, just to kind of give an overview that we're working on this, and it is an evolution from the 2014 plan.
So I would like for Mark and I to finalize the cover letter. But the
Sure.
one thing that I did want to say is that it should be from the committee, not for me as the chair. The last one just said the Affordable Housing Committee, then listed the members underneath.
Yep.
And so I'd like something like that, but Mark and I can finalize the letter.
Yeah, and I think the next major milestone for us working forward is to I think the process from here is for us to refine the document so we're comfortable sharing it with the community. And other boards and commissions to get their thoughts and feedback to refine the plan as we move forward to adoption. So I think that we certainly have the ability and time to go ahead and tweak that letter, Steve. The next page summarizes what the term affordable housing means. I think we understand what this is, but many people do not. I think the idea here in terms of eligible income levels and then the maximum monthly gross rents and sale prices. I think it's important to get that out on the table first, so that people understand the three different components that go into affordable housing. Income, rental rate or sale price, and the length of the restriction.
Can I add something here?
Of course.
Can we have, or should we have, what the current AMI is in Fairfield for 2022? And perhaps a link to a web page by HUD or somebody where it would be updated annually? Does that make some sense to people?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I find the HUD page not to be particularly user-friendly, Carrie, because the domain link takes you to a page with a
Oh, yeah.
litany of programs and processes.
Yeah.
But I'll work with maybe Carol and with Mark to get what we think is the best HUD page that's going to be stable for 5 years.
Or
So
if
that-
not, we can just update it on our own website, current AMI, just have that as a link someplace on a
Yeah, I
local
think-
website.
Mhm.
And update it every year, because this really doesn't, people say, well, what is the current AMI for Fairfield? And they're not going to know where to find it.
Well, Mark, is it already on the website
But on the town's website,
or on your department's
the,
website?
it is, but only as a, similar to this, which is the income eligibility for various programs that we run, which are based on the 80% AMI or 60% AMI.
If I could ask Carol if she has it on the Housing Authority website, or is there another source that she could think of that's easy to access?
I mean, we'd have to create it. We do update that information annually. We don't have the AMI because, again, we're showing eligibility, which is based on what Glenn has here. But I would agree with Glenn, having worked through HUD's website, you have to, it's not a something you can link to easily. You'd have to, fill out the search parameters.
Maybe the way to approach this, because I think the calculations actually get a little bit complicated, Steve, because according to the state methodology, it's the lower of state median income or
Right.
area. So in fact, you can even report the area, but that's still not the right number because it could be the state number that we end up using. So maybe the way to approach this could be if Mark has this number on the department website, we simply say in 2022, the numbers were this. And here's the department website that you can go see the most recent information that's been posted.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting for a number of people to know what the average median income is in Fairfield for other reasons besides affordable housing.
Yep.
I agree. Okay.
Hey, Glenn, I mean, I'm looking at this at 63% of what document should be in it, and I could really, see it. Could you make it a little bit bigger possibly?
And
Perfect. That's great. Thank
Yep.
you. It was just a little bit difficult to read. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, and I was hoping that people would sort of watch it, on their own. So if you get a little busy, if I'm scrolling up and down pages, let me just apologize in advance.
No. Thank you so much for doing that. It was a little bit
pleasure.
difficult to read, so.
Got it.
And Glenn, sometimes defining something, you can define it by what it is not. And I know this is the Affordable Housing Plan. It makes a little reference to workforce housing, which is also important. And I can't suggest where, but at some place we should define what workforce housing is, which I think is 80 to 120%, if I'm not mistaken. The town needs that as well. And that's part of creating housing opportunities.
I'm wondering if
you
it
did
makes sense.
I think we had in prior years, may have a glossary of terms that was in the appendix that might make sense for people to consult, and then we can include in there a definition of some of these things, workforce housing, AMI. I mean, people don't know what that is.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because I mean, if you were someone who was reading this, you may, like someone looking for housing, you may not understand exactly what this means. So I think that's a great idea, Mark.
So I think if we're headed, as Steve had suggested, in the direction of 2 documents, one of which is a larger document, we can have a glossary in the back. So I've made a note of that. And I think this is kind of similar to what we did in 2014, because 2014 had a main report and then an appendix with a bunch of extra stuff.
Yeah.
So I think what we can do here is, find the happy medium between both of those, so that the glossary would end up in this document, and then the executive summary to get people familiar with most of the major aspects would be separate. Good. I think the next page is where we get into the introduction here overall in terms of why housing issues are important for Fairfield, to recognize some of the issues associated with it. On the next 2 pages, 4 and 5, I've got a summary of the 88 Affordable Housing Plan, and then also the 2014 Affordable Housing Plan. And as you can see, our intention here is to get a click link so that we can send people to the other documents so that they can refer back to them if they wish. So more than anything else, this is to kind of set the stage. It ended up being 3 pages because there's enough meat in the 1988 and 2014 plans. I needed to summarize it rather than send people there.
You scroll down on that page, then. So you list the 4 accomplishments. We had 11 goals. And so we accomplished number 3, number 4, number 7, and number 6. Those are what you have there. But I thought we also had a model plan.
We did.
Yeah. So you could give us one more bullet point there, Glenn.
Sure.
Got it. Anything else on the introduction?
Yeah, I had one, I don't know why this word bothers me, but on page 3, you've got housing provides shelter to meet people's physiologic needs. And all of a sudden that word physiologic sounds really kind of too big.
Yeah.
People's human needs or people's
Needs.
Housing. It just seems.
Basic needs.
Yeah, basic human needs.
Yeah,
That's
I found that word very jarring there for some reason.
no, good for you, Carrie. I think, that comes from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that's the word that's often used, but we don't need to be policy wonks about this. I think
Really? Yeah.
swapping that out with basic human needs is excellent. Thank you.
Okay.
The next major section of the plan relates to background information. Again, I think some of this information we understand and take for granted. I felt that some of this information would be useful and helpful for others in the community. Just to kind of go through it quickly, the overall growth of the community, our changing housing mix, the population growth in the community here. I'm just going to scooch it down just a sec, give an overview of the pages here. Overall population growth in Fairfield, the housing mix in town, our comparison to the state averages, the change in housing affordability over the last 50 years or so, in terms of housing prices, a ratio of income. Information.
Stop there
from-
a second.
Yeah.
Yep.
If you could just define Alice at some point, that point number 3, you've got the Alice metric.
Yep, thank you, Steve. information about cost burdened households by income group, and pointing out the number of households in Fairfield that are cost burdened, and trying to separate those that are less than 80% of AMI and those that, you know, are more than 80% AMI and choose to spend more than 30% of their income on housing. It's not as big a public policy issue as the households earning less than 80% of AMI. I think an observation that the affordable housing we have is not enough to meet the needs. And a graphic here on the bottom of this page that explains the difference between sort of a naturally occurring affordable housing is that it may meet all of the criteria except it's not deed restricted, whereas deed restricted is available to meet the needs over the long term. This actually is a house in Fairfield. I got it from the assessor's database. I don't know if you're comfortable with that, but I just wanted to point out for you that it's not, I guess I could find a house in another community, but this is one I know the metrics are relevant to our work here. But I did want to point out it is an existing house. I guess it's an Easter egg for whoever can find it. Mark, you can't. I think I told you where it is. You can't tell anybody and you can't go look for it.
Pretty common.
Glenn?
Yes.
On the left-hand margin, you've got 3 paragraphs. That middle paragraph, I don't believe is true. I don't think we have 1,300 ownership units that will sell below 80%. I don't think it's true.
It might be based on, well, okay, it's ACS data, so.
This is the problem we have with the data. I think Steve's on to something here in the sense that we've talked about this before. The 2010 census data is 12 years old already. The ACS data is a 5-year average, which culminates on a survey that was done in 2019. So in other words, the data that's in the ACS is from 2015 through 2019. So when they report something, it's something from 5 years ago. Now, the 2020 census results are supposed to be released in May, but that's too late for us to really have time to bring it out, digest it, and get it into the report. So maybe there's 2 things I can do here. I think number 1 is delete the paragraph. And the second one is, with Mark's assistance, try to work with the assessor. But even that, even if we knew what the current assessment sales ratio was, we're using assessed value to estimate market value, and it's not a science at all. So maybe talk this through. Maybe I've convinced myself here the best thing to do is take that paragraph out.
Probably, yes, yeah.
Steve, thank you. On the next page is an overview of the affordable housing units that we get credit for in Fairfield, the ones that count to the state's list. These numbers are all in yellow. I've spoken with the Department of Housing. They expect to have their updated list out at the end of February, beginning of March. They're compiling the data as well, maybe not as of this moment, but they're in the process of completing their work on the list, which will be issued at that time period. So all these numbers will update, and as a result, our percentage will also change. So they're highlighted here in yellow just so that you can remember to do that. Go ahead, Kara.
Page 10, where we were just there with the 2 houses. About
Yeah.
the 4th line down, you have a typo, I think, called naturally occurring affordable housing of NOAA. I think you mean or NOAA.
Oh, good for you, Carrie. All right, you're going to find the Easter egg house in
I see a
Fairfield.
lot. I'm
Be
if
the
I see
editor.
things.
Thank you.
Well, I can't not see them, and if I see them, then I have to tell you about
I
them.
appreciate it, because
Okay.
once you've written it, it's very hard to see it yourself. So I appreciate anybody who catches any of them.
Get a
think-
piece of chocolate from Steve.
The next 2 pages, 12 and 13 page numbers. Many people don't understand what affordable housing is. They think it's, perhaps the worst example they've ever seen of affordable housing, whatever it might be. And so, or the old image of projects. And I think a visual gallery that says to people, this is the affordable housing which exists in our community today, and provides examples of different types of housing. And so people would say, well, maybe I'm okay with this, but geez, I'm really not a big fan of that. And I think it could promote discussion or dialogue. And so I thought, again, it's 2 pages, but I thought the visual gallery would help people visualize and understand that we're not talking about things which are bad or out of character in Fairfield. These are the affordable housing developments which exist in the community today. And I
Okay.
think the next,
You wanted some suggestions of what to put in the boxes?
I think if you've got some, Carrie, if you could just pop a quick
If you
email.
could use more pictures, other nice pictures of the same units. It doesn't have to be only one of each. You could take just another picture.
I wanted to try to give a sense of the breadth of these. And so
Yeah.
I've got the database and the list. Mark and I were talking about Greenfield Street, for example. So right-hand column, second one down. Greenfield Street actually has multiple 2 families, all of which are part of. So
Yeah.
this is one particular unit,
Yeah.
and we can get pictures of others. So
Yeah,
there's,
again, I think I don't want to belabor this, but there is some consistency issues here because we list Parkview Commons as 22 out of 22 units, which is in fact true. Greenfield Street, the home ownership of sweat equity housing, so to speak, is 14 at 14. So there's 7 duplexes there. So
maybe we could all send Glenn comments and potential pictures.
yeah,
or-
if there's other ones that we're missing, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
yeah, and I think Jackie just posted a comment in the chat. I think it was Jackie that said maybe some interior pictures. And I think that's not a bad idea either.
Not a bad idea.
No, it's not a
People
bad
that-
idea. It's a good idea.
Or
So-
just using those boxes for pullouts of quotes or what you just said to us. We want to show you the variety, just using it
Exactly.
for words.
So again, it's 2 pages, but I thought this information would be useful and helpful for people so that we can have a dialogue, not on people's fears, but on the reality of what we actually have in town.
Okay.
And then pages 14 and 15 are blank at the moment. I've explained to Mark that my goal here is to actually have a 2-page spread, which is a map of almost the middle part of Fairfield, along the rail line, along 95, along Route 1. It basically kind of extends from the Merritt south into the beach zone, and to highlight the locations of where these different developments are. So it would have a legend associated with it, but for people to be able to see that these units, these developments are really in many different places in Fairfield. So again, it's not a conceptual issue that people are concerned or afraid of something, they can actually see it. Now, Mark and I didn't end up completing this map for this draft of the plan. We want to try to make sure our inventory is correct. Some of the CDBG units will be very sort of small circles, just to indicate a general area where they're at. And some of the larger developments would be color coded and have larger circles. But again, the purpose of this, perhaps on an aerial photo backdrop of Fairfield, is to show people that there are many units already in our community and the character of Fairfield, et cetera, is still intact. The next 2 pages, I was thinking would be useful to have a chart or graph that showed from 1960 through to today, the addition of units at different points in time along the way. This is something that Fairfield has been working on for 50 or 60 years. According to the timeline we had in the 2014 plan, I think the first housing authority units came online in 1964, 1966, somewhere in that range. I've got the state database that indicates dates many of these units came online. But I wanted to show people this isn't something new or something that's only come up in the past year or so. This is something that Fairfield has been working on for some time, and we're making progress. And this is what it looks like. And then we'd like to continue that. So I realized that this is 6 pages, right? This information. But I think it's almost 10% of the report. But I think that it could be important and useful to help people visualize and understand the directions that we think it's appropriate for the community to go. So
I agree. I like it.
thank you, Steve. I think this chart here is an example, just comparing information in Fairfield with other communities in the state of different sizes and the percentage of affordable housing. I think there are communities of similar size to Fairfield who have managed to do more in terms of affordable housing, or communities with similar percentages. Some are smaller than us. Part of our challenge is because of the size of the community, their percentages, et cetera. Different similar types of communities and communities nearby, just to kind of give a sense of what the data set is all about.
Are
The
any of
next
those
page.
similar sized communities towns besides us, or are they all cities?
Well, given the OPM database, Carrie, so these are the 5 next largest and the 5 next smallest communities in terms of population.
Yeah.
So these are just just if we were going to compartmentalize these on the graph, they're in this range right here, right?
Right.
They're the,
Are they cities or are they towns, or is it a mix? I think they're all cities, but I'm not positive about that. Meriden,
East Hartford is a
I think
town,
you're right, Carrie, yeah.
Stratford's a town,
Okay,
Wallingford's a town.
okay.
I think Greenwich calls themselves a town as well.
The bigger issue is the composition of the affordable housing inventory, which
Yeah.
I'm sure Glenn will talk about later.
Yeah, we get to that later, Mark. I
Okay.
think that
So Glenn, what is Group A versus Group B? I couldn't find a definition for that.
I think,
Those are education.
yeah, so I'm
Yeah.
sorry, Steve, it's way down here at the bottom in this very small type
Yeah,
here.
but it doesn't say anything.
The DRG refers to district reference groups, a grouping system used by the State Department of Education based on socioeconomic characteristics.
Is A better than B?
A
B
is,
better than
yes.
A?
A
Yeah.
is the more expensive community,
Okay. Higher income, you might say?
higher, you might say.
Lower rates of poverty, better test scores, more resources available to support the school system.
So is that the same as saying that West Hartford, Glastonbury, Greenwich, Trumbull, and Fairfield are about, they're similar, they're all about the same mix?
Yeah,
Similar socioeconomically. I mean, I didn't get into the actual data itself. I thought it was helpful to rely on a third-party source to say, okay, here's the way the state has grouped these. These were ones that I felt might resonate with people in Fairfield.
I'm not sure that column, Group A versus Group B, helps much, but I'll leave that up to you for your choice.
Yeah, so I think, but I think I can just go with Group Bs. And the reason is that Westport is over here. So I thought, if people are looking for comparisons, we can just go with Group B only. So I'll find another Group B to add into the mix. I think the next page, page 19, talks about really 830G and why controlling our futures will be beneficial for Fairfield in the long run. Numbers again are highlighted here because we don't have the exact numbers yet to plug in here.
So Glenn, are we going to say anywhere on this page or anywhere in the document that we're never going to reach 10%? That it's mathematically almost impossible?
at the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Well, that talks about falling further and further behind on the 10%. I think adding a sidebar.
And to me, the importance is just that it means that we are always going to be susceptible to 830G, and the moratoriums remain important.
Yep. So I think some of that discussion occurs later too, Steve.
Thank you.
So that's the section, if you will, the background information. Back here to the table of contents, the background information. The next section talked about current housing policies. These are essentially sort of very simple one-page summaries here in terms of the plan of conservation and development. Just to reference some highlights from the plan. As you know, the Planning and Zoning Commission has issued an RFP to update the plan of conservation and development. So I didn't want to get too into the weeds because that plan will be updated sometime during the lifespan of this plan. But just to kind of give it some context, and then also to include the information back from the 1979 POCD, which was the discussion of centers and how that might be a useful approach going forward. And that's really kind of as a sidebar in a discussion rather than a specific recommendation. And the next page is a summary of the zoning regulations, some of the basic provisions and requirements, different types of districts for people who are not familiar with that, kind of an overview of some of the regulatory provisions in the zoning regulations related to housing and affordable housing.
Glenn, at the bottom, that number 7, if you could just clarify that it's a fee for all types of construction. It's not just new construction for residential. It could be commercial or colleges.
Actually, new construction or additions.
Thank you. Got it. And the next 2 pages are a summary of the survey results. Just an overview of the participants who participated, some of the responses that we received. And I think it's the next page, page 23, where we talk about some of the strategies to be considered and discussed as part of the housing plan. I color coded the boxes. I sorted them by the percent agree or disagree. So we have I guess in rank order, the different strategies. Green highlight in the agree column for ones that had more than 50% support. Where we didn't get 50% support, even though the agree was higher than the disagree. I think it was hard to say that most respondents felt that. And then at the very last question, a majority of people disagreed with this statement. So I think up here, there is a margin of error, excuse me, around these survey responses, which don't allow us to make broad conclusions about the way Fairfield residents feel about this. But I think what we can say is that participants or respondents expressed varying levels of support. And because, for example, even on the one with the lowest level of agreement, 54% agree, 33% disagree. So even at what I think the margin of error would be on a sample size like this, I still think we have more people clearly supported or agreed with that statement than did. Section 5 is an overall vision in terms of, based on this information, based on the survey results, the other discussions and research we've done, making the transition into what is our goal for the affordable housing plan, providing for a variety of housing types in Fairfield to address affordable housing needs, expand housing options and choices, and help meet the housing needs of households of all ages, sizes, income, and characteristics. I carried over this graphic at the bottom of the page, the 2014 Affordable Housing Plan, because it still seemed that we were looking at ways to provide an adequate number of units, an appropriate location of units, an appropriate design of units. So I just wanted to try to show some symmetry in things that we had talked about. There's also some sub-goals in here. These are similar to things that we had talked about and were also in the 2014 plan. Some of the strategies which are to follow clearly address the issue of affordable housing, and those are signified by this blue box with AH in it. Some of the strategies to follow provide for just housing opportunities and choices, and that's a light blue box with HO in it. And then there's the green box here at the bottom with the asterisk in it. Strategies that might not result in an increase in the number of affordable housing units, but are considered important to the overall program and process. These are things, again, like, standard housing affordability plans and things like that. Then that sets the stage for moving into the,
Wait, Glenn, can you
Yes.
stay there for a second?
absolutely.
In the index, you have, for the housing strategies, you have a left column that has them numbered 6.1 through 6.7. And the right column, you have the page number where to find them. And I think that would be helpful here too.
Got it. Thank you. So I've numbered the goals, if you will, and then the particular strategies that follow so that we can refer to these in the future. So here, for example, our first goal, increase the number of assisted housing units. Mark and I were talking earlier in the meeting here about the fact that a number of other communities of similar size to Fairfield have a higher percentage of government assisted units. So our challenge in terms of increasing our affordable housing percentage is to try to find ways to increase the number of assisted units, to work with the housing authority, to assist them in their projects, locating site and land, helping them with approvals, funding, and trying to move in a positive direction so that we can start to catch up. As you can see from the percentages here in the right-hand column, when we look at the number of government-assisted units and number of deed-restricted units, most of these other communities are 90 to 100% government-assisted units, and Fairfield is not. So this is an area which we could make some significant progress in.
Do low income tax credits count as government assisted?
I believe that they do, Carrie.
That would be good.
Yes. So here, for example, is the way that the recommendations and strategies follow. This one on the top of page 27, for example, would be identified at 6.1.1. The goal is help the housing authority create assisted housing units. There's a brief description about what that is so that people who, again, are not familiar with the jargon and the lingo can catch up to what it is we're talking about. The sidebar, again, the blue box indicates that this will help increase the number of affordable housing units, number of affordable housing developments in Fairfield. There are types of recommendations in here. The concept of helping the housing authority obtain land for future assisted housing units is a policy. This is ongoing. This is something we'll continue for 5 years. Below that is conduct an inventory of town-owned land and facilities for opportunities to create assisted housing units. This is more of an action step or a task. It's red here to highlight it, so it jumps off the page. But this is something that can be done sometime in the next few years. And you'll see as we get down to the implementation section towards the end, I tasked this one for the Affordable Housing Committee in 2023. And we may tweak this or modify it, et cetera. But the way this is laid out is most of these are ongoing programs. In black, these are things that we should try to continue to try to do, and reds are specific tasks. So help housing authority create assisted housing units, guide other entities developing assisted housing. These are private entities taking advantage of low-income housing tax credits, for example, and putting those together in Fairfield.
When I look at this, I just say, who is going to do all this? And who is the how? And who, I mean, you say the Affordable Housing Committee, but what does that really mean? That's the
I think,
challenge.
one of the tasks, I think there could be other ways to do this. You staff assistants perhaps, or an intern with Mark's office to work with the committee over the course of a couple of months. There aren't that many town-owned land or facilities in Fairfield to create an inventory list and to walk through them and say, are there any areas where there's additional land or where land could be repurposed to help create assisted housing units?
Well, I would suggest that we've already done this, but there's always an opportunity to re-examine the list and see whether or not we may have missed anything. So,
Yeah, so I think create or conduct or update the inventory. I think land is the hardest part here. So if we could.
Yeah, Glenn, I want to address Carrie's comment. I was going to do this a little bit later, but there are a lot of goals that are listed, and we really have to prioritize. We've got to pick 3 or 5 or 6 or whatever it is that are going to be the ones we really are going to work on. And the last time when we had the 11 goals, the committee decided we're going to do this one now. We're going to do this one. And so, Carrie, the committee needs to decide which ones we're going to tackle and how we're going to tackle it.
Yeah, it's the how we're going to tackle it that concerns me, because the way I see us of assembling land for assisted living or for the housing authorities to buy up land. Really. I mean, there's not much land around, and there's not much town-owned land around. And it seems to me there's a lot of older homes that are probably ready for renovation. If you consider the average useful length of a house to be 75 years, which is a number that's often used, sometimes it's less, is that the committee itself starts to somehow using housing trust fund monies or other monies is assembling these parcels.
I guess this goes back to, and I think it's a question that I've posed to Steve and to Glenn, to others, what is our overall objective here?
Yeah.
Because we don't have unlimited resources, either staff, money, time, and we have to determine what is it that what are we trying to accomplish? And certainly, I will say that in my conversations with other boards and commissions and elected officials here, there is clearly an emphasis on how do we reassert control over this process and guide where affordable housing, how and where it gets developed in town, not be subject to 830G. And if that is the case, then our priority, our number one goal should be looking at ways in which we could create units at scale to achieve a moratorium sooner rather than later. Even if it provides temporary relief, it does provide an opportunity for us to reestablish some control over the process. And so if that is in fact, and I'm posing this as a question, if that is our top priority, then we should align our strategies and resources accordingly. And, we do provide rehab assistance and you'll look at our deed restricted inventory, and a number of those are the result of loans that we provide to either homeowners or landlords in exchange for a deed restriction or a covenant to repay, which makes, things affordable in town. But they do not contribute housing unit equivalency points for a moratorium. So they contribute to our overall inventory, but they do nothing in terms of accomplishing the goal of reaching a moratorium. And so we are continued to be subject to these 830G applications, for better or for worse. So again, I think you're touching upon a key issue. The committee really does need to discuss what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and we do have to prioritize our goals and our strategies.
And Mark, let me ask or state that I think the moratorium, the first moratorium is within sight, I believe. And so we're really talking about what can we do for the second moratorium and maybe the third.
Well, one of the goals that we set in the first 2014 plan was to achieve a moratorium within that 5-year period.
Yep.
We are not yet there. So it underscores the difficulty
Hmm.
to achieve enough points under the moratorium based on a strategy that is largely driven by private for-profit development. And that's not, we certainly need to hold other private developers accountable, that those that are doing things under 830G are going to do it regardless until we have some mechanism in place to prevent that. And I would argue that the inclusionary zoning provision is important because otherwise those developments would be built and there wouldn't be any affordable units in them. But, it takes a long time to bring things to fruition based on construction. Just the normal process of going through the normal permitting, design, financing, construction, that's a 4 to 5 year period of time. So we're going to actually see, not only the impact of the 2020 census, which will reset and move the goalpost, not significantly, I don't believe, but it will still have an impact in terms of the threshold needed to get to a moratorium. And there are also some provisions in the state statutes that were amended in 2017 that sunset this year. And so, again, that will have a modest but perceptible impact in terms of our achieving moratorium this year. So again, the goalposts will move, not because of anything we did. So it's a frustrating situation, I know, but you may have a different take on this, but I do think we need to think about what it is that we're trying to do, because we have a finite amount of resources to put toward this.
Yeah.
So, Mark, what we have in place, do you think we could get to the moratorium this year?
I do not, based on our current approach. I've
Okay,
made this point to a number of folks that unless a project is actually in construction at this moment, we will not see a CO this year such that those will count towards a moratorium application this year. So we have a number of projects that are approved, but have not yet pulled a building permit for whatever reason. We can't count on those projects for at least 18 months. So it underscores, again, we may need to look at other strategies, and there's some in here we've talked about before. But I think the point we're talking about with 6.1 is, while it is not very well defined, is certainly working with providers like the Housing Authority, where the vast majority of the units are affordable, and they're affordable in essence in perpetuity, will serve our long-term interest far better than some of these other approaches. So
That's the most bang for our buck, really.
yeah.
that's what
Right.
I'm arguing, yes.
Energy and limited resources.
So, and we'll, we have on our agenda later a discussion on Bureau Street. That's a good example. There's an opportunity. The Housing Authority has identified it. The town provided some support. This committee provided some support to those efforts. So we don't know all these things that are going to come up. And with regard to the 2014 plan, we did set goals and we had a timetable, but those changed too. So we have to be a little flexible in terms of how things materialize.
Mark, the last plan had 2 moratoriums in the goals. Moratorium number 1, moratorium number 2.
Yep.
And I think it's realistic to say that if a development is not in the horizon today, it will not be part of the plan until we do our next update, because it takes that long, as you said, 3, 4, 5 years to get to a C of O. it's important that we get to that first moratorium, so then we can better control what happens where. It may not happen this year, but it will happen, will it not, next year? That first moratorium.
We're close, but some things do have to break our way. That's for sure.
I mean, do we focus on how to get the first moratorium and then say what we can have in line for the second one? I mean,
And
then we
again,
did-
I'm sorry, the point I was trying to make here was, and if you agree, that's great. I just wanted to test the committee, what is it that we want to focus on? Because, pursuing a moratorium entails maybe perhaps different strategies or approaches than, just looking at creating naturally occurring, encouraging affordable housing for the sake of, more housing diversity or something like that. So I'm posing the question. I didn't mean to just say that that's what we're doing. I'm putting it out there.
Oh, I just have a quick question. Do you think that whatever we have in line right now, that could get us to the moratorium in like a year and a half?
Well, there's a lot of variables when we're dealing with construction and we're not actually the ones doing the construction and development. So, there's projects that have been approved that have the opportunity to pull a building permit, have had the opportunity to pull a building permit for some time now and haven't done so for whatever reason. There are other projects that are approved and are in litigation. So there are a lot
variable.
of things that we can't control.
It's all just variable.
Yep.
So
Which is the issue. I think we've talked about how can we better leverage our existing housing resources or housing assets. Is there other things that we can be doing? The issue for a moratorium is that, in order for it to count, it has to be built or newly deed restricted after 1990. And it has to be restricted for a period of 40 years or more. And that the second part is a tough ask. And I know we've talked about, possibly different interpretation as it relates to accessory dwelling units, but the state does not subscribe to that theory or interpretation of the statutes. But just because it's hard doesn't mean we shouldn't necessarily look at it.
So Mark, it's really, to me, it's a dual thing that getting the moratorium is a primary goal, but the way you get to the moratorium includes, as you mentioned, many steps underneath. And it might be ADUs, or it might be 4 families, or it might be helping the housing authority do a larger development. And so that bundle underneath the overall goal of getting the moratorium is also, we have to prioritize.
I can jump in just for a sec. I think this discussion is very helpful to me. Because I think you've raised issues about the level of detail in the plan. I've tried to be expressive in terms of different types of strategies. On the other hand, it can make the list look daunting in terms of the number of things that can be done or might need to be done. So hearing the committee talking about this is very helpful to me. I think section 6.7 of this plan is actually the goal to seek a moratorium exemption. And if that is the #1 issue for the community, then we should move that up and make it 6.1 instead of 6.7. I started off with assisted housing because the state mandate or requirement, this is, if you're looking ahead for it, it's on page 46. The state mandate is to increase the number of affordable housing developments in the community. So they didn't ask for units, they asked for developments, which is, to me, I guess it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it is what they asked. So I started off in preparing this plan for your review with the concept of how do we create more affordable housing developments, assisted, deed restricted, et cetera, and then got to the moratorium exemption later on. On the other hand, if we think our number one goal is the moratorium exemption, then let's put section 6.7 as 6.1. So just to throw it out there as food for thought.
Well, it's good food for thought. As an affordable housing advocate, achieving a moratorium was not my primary goal. My primary goal was increasing housing options for the people of Fairfield, especially affordable housing options. But I do understand now that we're never going to be free of 830G. And good planning should allow the community to help pick where developments are going to happen, to help facilitate the number of units, the design of the development. And those things we can't do as long as we're susceptible to 830G. We can't do as well. If we get a moratorium, then we get a little bit more control over our destiny. So,
Steve, I think that's a major issue right now. I mean, you see how people are unhappy with the size and scope and, you know, location of the developments. And if we can kind of get a handle on this and like have some type of, you know, say about how things are developed, or at least some type of input, maybe it could balance the needs of the affordable housing with, you know, what the community wants too, because there is a lot of, you know, input from the community about what they're happy with or not happy with. And I think there has to be a balance. And I think part of what we should think about is how to find that balance. So the community is, you know, acceptable and happy with what the developments are, and then the developments are, you know, able to be built.
I agree, Cindy. It's not an easy process.
Oh, no, I'm not saying it's an easy process. I'm just saying, like, I think that's what, something maybe we should, you know, try to focus on, or try to, you know, find a balance with, because it just seems like there's so much backlash with, you know, developments that are happening and the community is unhappy, and then there's a need for affordable housing. Maybe we can try to facilitate some type of, I don't know, like something to make the community and the need, you know, more in tune with each other, or more acceptable.
Mark,
Yeah,
it's Joanne. Can I ask you a question? I think we had this discussion some time ago. Has there ever been any discussion on ways to incentivize builders to add more units in their developments to than the usual 30%? I mean, can we offer, is there any way we can offer incentives for them to do that?
well, the issue with these typically is they're coming in as 830G applications. So
Right, and if they come in as an 8-30G, that's a 30%.
So my question, I guess, to you would be, how would the committee feel about committing financial resources to a project proposed by a private developer under 830G? Would you support, you know, providing an incentive of some sort to provide more affordable units if the mechanism by which that project got approved was through 830G?
Well,
I
you
think
limit it.
something.
Let me just jump in and say that you only limit it to the, well, let me, I would be in favor of supporting financially if we got to negotiate the design and the density, not just other parts of the project.
And the issue is that we don't typically have a seat at that table. So that,
Yeah.
those are questions before the Planning and Zoning Commission. They're looking at issues related to land use and then public health, safety, and the need for affordable housing and trying to make a determination. So factors related to design or even the number percentage of units and financial incentives to that, they're not part of the equation. There's not an opportunity unless it's in litigation, in which case there might be an opportunity to do that if it ends up being an appeal. But again, you know, I have steered some folks that have talked to me, private developers, who have said, well, you have a housing trust fund. What if I were to propose a 830G, would you consider financing my application? And I think, you know, and as a general thing, I don't think we would want to do that unless, again, it was a developer with whom we had an understanding to address some of the issues that you're raising, Steve and Joanne. I think from a design, and you know, there are ways we've certainly worked with the housing. Pine Tree Lane, for example, was a 830G application because it didn't conform to our zoning regulations. But I don't think anyone, well, at least this committee, there were certainly people that did oppose the application at the time, but the commission generally wasn't approved it unanimously, and this committee was in support of it. So I don't want to make a blanket rule that we wouldn't consider participating with an 830G. It is a tool by which we can smooth some of the issues that they may have in terms of conforming with zoning. But a lot of these applications are highly contentious. And, you know, again, I don't know if there's a mechanism by which we have a seat at the table to negotiate something better once it gets into a formal application process. We're not at that table.
And I don't think we have enough money really to incentivize a regular developer. If you're doing 40 units.
Yeah, I guess the other way I would pose this to Joanne is there is a mechanism in our current zoning regulations, and communities do provide inducements or incentives for developers to create affordable housing units by providing a density bonus. And that's in essence what we've done with our DRD regulations. They're not adequate. Yeah, they're not adequate right now because they don't provide enough density to offset the cost. So no one takes advantage of it. But I think if we could, as is contained in our plan, have a discussion with planning and zoning and see if we can make some changes to our DRD regulations. So that would be a realistic alternative for developers to exercise that option in lieu of an 830G application. That would make sense. And then if we were talking with the developer that was exercising that option, where something was more or less as of right under our zoning, then I think it might be an easier conversation to say, well, instead of the 20% or whatever is required as the density bonus, the affordable housing set aside, would you consider, you know, 40% if we provided some kind of financial incentive to do so?
Well, that's basically.
I think
what
that's
I'm
an option too.
But what my point is, and I'm going back to my favorite subject, is pocket housing.
Hmm.
If there's a developer who wants to develop a piece of property and we can give them an incentive to develop pocket housing with side-by-sides rather than 5-6 story buildings that are basically, they look like prisons. I'm wondering if there's a way that we could do that rather than these big brick buildings have neighborhoods. Again, I was born and raised in Hales Court, so I know what that living is, and it's conducive to bringing up children. My concern is children, families with children, because if you put them in these big buildings, they have nowhere to grow.
Yeah, I think we need a variety of housing options here, besides our single family detached, you know, houses.
Right.
So some people, you know, that perhaps they're young or they're at the other end of the age spectrum, an apartment building would make sense. But, as you said, for a family, we don't have a lot of school-age children that live in these apartment buildings, which was a concern at the time in which they were under discussion, that it might impact things like school enrollment, but that hasn't proven to be the case. But I think if we're looking to try to create the type of low density, low rise type housing, the pocket neighborhoods that you and Carrie have talked about, maybe the way in which we do that is take the land out of the equation, which is, as Glenn mentioned, is a major cost. So, one of the things that we did in providing financing to purchase Greenfield Street was basically make the land available to a developer to create something that is more in scale, consistent with the surrounding neighborhood. So it'll be a more of a low intensity type development, as opposed to something that's 4 or 5 stories, as you said. But the reason why we did that was because it was next to town property that didn't have street frontage. So we get even more bang for the buck, because we can put it with existing town property and try to create the development, like you mentioned, the development that's more in character, more consistent, or in scale with the surrounding area. So, land is a major cost and drives some development decisions. So maybe we can take that out of the equation by using tools like the Housing Trust Fund.
Yeah, well,
Does that mean that, oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, does that mean that we start to identify properties that we could purchase and then help develop? I mean, I think that goes back to the prior discussion of us figuring out where affordable housing should be. Or not be, at least identify places where.
Sure, that would be one approach, but that's not what we do.
No, I mean, it's not what we do, but if we're gonna start to look at places where, well, this, we could buy this place and we can, this property and we can develop property there, are we gonna go to that? Are we gonna do that? Like, say, we'll identify properties that are available and then determine whether or not we could invest in them and make affordable housing there?
Well, we wouldn't have to be the developer, but we'd have to set the conditions as the property owner if we were to have some ability to do that, which we don't at the present, because our housing trust fund is only funded by, fees on zoning permits or building permits at the present time. I guess just building permits, but if there's other ways of increasing the funding of the housing trust fund, such as every family in Fairfield contributes $100 to it as part of their taxes, if we had some money to do that type of thing with, you could do something like purchase property, set some conditions, and then sell it to a developer who would do what is spelled out in the conditions.
No, I understand that, but I mean, my question is, are we gonna begin to identify properties? Is that gonna be part of what the committee is gonna do, start to look for property? I mean.
Well, that seems like a pretty big charge to give to a bunch of people who are mostly amateurs.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's what my question was. I mean, we can't just say.
If we had staff who could do it, then,
there's not a lot of property out there either.
That we need more staff.
I was thinking more on tax incentives for a builder.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we should take a look at the tools that we have, and one is, that's another way of structuring something, which is using either tax credits or abatements or something along those lines to incentivize,
Proverbial carrot.
Mm-hmm.
That was my thought, because I've seen other places that have done that, and they give them they offset some of the taxes, and just in order for them to build what's conducive to the area.
So maybe we should not just identify what goals we have, but what tools we also have going forward to create affordable housing. I mean, if we have the trust fund, what can we do? I think there
Let
are
me just
two different
interject,
steps
guys,
that we need to take.
that it's almost 8:30. This is a very important discussion. But I just wanted to check with Mark, is there anything else that we need to cover, or can we go longer with this discussion?
Well, I agree. It's an important discussion. We, at some point, do need to talk about our annual report submission to the RTM. We don't necessarily have to do that tonight, but perhaps we could, if folks have had an opportunity to review that draft, have some comments, maybe we could either have a special meeting to reconvene and discuss that, but it should go to the RTM sometime this month for a report to committee in February.
That
So
could
why
be
don't we
reviewed and
move the
approved
balance of this?
on email, couldn't it? I'm sorry, Joanne.
I was gonna
Mark-
say, why don't we move this portion, I mean, the extra discussion of this portion to the next meeting and move on with the agenda?
Well, I only, if Glenn has some things and direction we need, and I didn't mean to necessarily hijack. I was just trying to focus on what our priorities were, but we've gone, and I apologize for taking us off off the rail here, but
A lot of
I
us
do think Glenn needs some further direction on to finish up this piece.
Yeah, I would like to try to finish. Glenn, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, Mark, I don't think you need to apologize. I think that conversation is a very important one. As I listen to some of the feedback here tonight, it seems to me that the concept of this document may be too big and too unwieldy for us going forward. So I want you guys to think about that. I think the schedule that I have in my mind, I did budget for another meeting before we were ready to go to a public informational meeting. If Steve and the committee, if you want, we can continue through the remaining pages of this document to give an overview. We can either schedule a special meeting in 2 weeks, or our next meeting after that, I believe it's February 9, whatever we feel that is appropriate for us to do. I think one of the challenges for us going forward is there are many recommendations on the pages we're about to hit, which involve the Planning and Zoning Commission, that builds off the meeting that we had with them back in October. But I also think or November. It's probably time for us to kind of get that under our belt, because we need to coordinate with them. And the new chairman, new members, so it may be a bit of a surprise.
Well,
So
I would suggest we take another 15 minutes with Glenn.
Okay. I
And
will
then the
make it
last
happen.
15 minutes, we do the annual report.
Yep,
Mark, how does that sound? Okay.
good to go. All right, I'm on it. So based on this discussion here, goal 6.1 is increase the number of assisted housing units. I've made a note here that possibly we will bring 6.7 forward, because the concept of a moratorium or exemption may be our number one issue that we want to lead off with. So we've already talked about this page in terms of assisted housing. The next major element of this report, goal 6.2, is about increasing in the number of deed restricted affordable housing units. And this is one which is an H30G or some other type of set-aside development where a certain percentage of units are set aside. It's different than the housing authority, which could be 100% affordable or 80% affordable, 20% market. So this is a different flavor and different approach. So there's some sub recommendations in here, and most of these involve the Planning and Zoning Commission in some way, shape, or form. So for example, here on page 29 of the report, the recommendation is to increase the affordability set-aside requirement for all zoning approaches. At the present time, our affordability set-aside is down in the 10% range for certain zones or situations, or 12%. And it's really only the DRD, which is at 20%. Given the market rates of some units in Fairfield, and with the understanding that 80% units basically sort of cover their cost, it's not a penalty or punitive. people are getting 830G densities, but not necessarily setting aside as perhaps as many units as we might be able to get. So one of the options here could be to express to the Planning and Zoning Commission for them to investigate increasing the set aside, perhaps as high as 15 to 20%, but also make it consistent across all different approaches. That's
Glenn,
one.
on top, that second paragraph, I think is important for people to understand. And I think you're saying that if we have even an inclusionary zoning development, if it's only 10% affordable, we actually fall behind in the number that we need to get the 10% exit out of 830G.
If we're not keeping up with the overall production of housing, both, market rate and otherwise, we're falling further and further behind. Our percentages are getting lower, and that doesn't move us along in our overall conversation. So one goal here is to increase the affordability set aside for some developments. The second conversation could be about the length of time that affordable units are subject to the deed restrictions. We do have situations where units are subject to the affordability restrictions. The affordability restriction comes off and we're getting further away from the 10% again. So the state statutes talk about 40 years as a minimum. There are some provisions in the regulations that talk about 40 years, whichever is longer, or the life of the unit. And that, again, could be a suggestion for inclusion in regulations or in the standard housing affordability plan.
And Glenn, do you know of any communities that have tried to push it beyond 40 years?
Yeah, I mean, you're already doing it. For example, in the I think it's the transportation the TC Park, which is part of the DID, the current regulation says for as long as the building or development exists, but in no case for less than 40 years. So you're already doing it in some situations in Fairfield, and the issue is, well, why isn't we doing that in all? In the
Good.
I know Darienne's doing it. Many other communities around the state are looking at this. If the units are going to come off at the end of 40 years, all we're doing is treading water. We're not going to be able to make demonstrable progress if we can't keep them affordable longer. Update the standard housing affordability plan based on our knowledge and experience. And if it's already in good shape, then there's nothing much that needs to happen there. Update the standard deed restriction documents. Require the use of an approved administrator. Again, I think with Mark's able assistance here, we're on top of many of these issues. But there are situations in many communities where the affordability plans aren't really being followed, and nobody's sort of keeping an eye on things, and affordable units are being lost through I guess inattentiveness is perhaps the best way to put it. And the use of an approved administrator, somebody who's qualified, and any change in the administrator could be beneficial for the town in the future. I think recommendations to consider reviewing and revising the DRD zone. In 1988, the regulations were modified to increase the parcel size, which makes it a significant challenge in some areas to do DRD developments, and also reduce the density. So even though the regulations are set up that you can get a 50% density bonus if 20% of the units are set aside, it's perhaps not working as well as it could or should. So the strategy here is as a early part of the regulation rewrite, which the Planning and Zoning Commission will be doing, to revisit the DRD, because I do think it is an opportunity for us to get appropriate developments that fit into Fairfield, but have an affordability component. They don't have to be, big overbearing developments. They could fit into the character of town. On page 35, we've identified some particular things that could be looked at. But again, if there are concerns about the depth and specificity of this report, we could treat this as an appendix and go sort of at a higher scale here overall. I think 6.3, the goal is to consider ways to guide the location of multifamily and mixed-use development in the community. I think right now we have a few zoning districts in Fairfield that allow for or encourage higher density development or have a affordability set aside. But it might be useful and beneficial to consider other areas. This is something which could be considered as part of the plan of conservation and development, which is being updated sometime in the next 5 years. Apologize for that. And to look at possible housing policy areas, areas served by transit, areas served by water, sewer infrastructure, walking distance of train stations, proximity to services. So there could be other ways to promote that. I think the other strategy of recommendations is ways to guide the design of multifamily and mixed-use development. I think Carrie found, Carrie, I got the site from you, which was this Affordable Housing Design Advisor.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
It was years ago, but because that was new to me, at least I don't remember seeing it. So that looks good. Yeah.
It's very helpful. There's a lot of great information here on this site. And if we can encourage and promote people in these directions by, helping design along, I think it'll go a long way to making people feel comfortable, if you will, with the types of development which might occur under the regulations. Providing or considering additional approaches to providing for housing diversity, as Steve indicated earlier, this could include things such as workforce housing, people earning 80 to 120% of AMI. I think perhaps as indicated in our prior discussion, if our goal is to get housing unit equivalent points, get to a moratorium, then we probably ought to be focusing on the 80% and less income. And then at some time in the future, bring those lessons over to looking at workforce housing. This could be an area for further exploration. And there are tax approaches and tax recommendations. Town involvement in the creation of affordable housing units. And this is something that could take time as well in terms of tax credits, abatements, and other types of tax incentives as well. I think more types of multifamily housing in more areas, 2-family or 3-family. We currently allow them in the C and D districts, and we could look at other options there. Facilitating mixed-use development in business zones. And I think, as was indicated earlier, just the whole concept of middle housing. And whether it's pocket neighborhoods, cottage courts, or even came across this picture of a little courtyard building type of approach that looks a little Harry Potterish, but it was built, I think it was St. Louis. And it's just a cute little project. And I think all sorts of people would love to live in a situation like this. So how could we encourage and allow these to happen, deed restricted or not? I think maintaining and enhancing other affordable housing programs, the trust fund, rental assistance units, mortgage assistance units, affordable housing efforts in terms of coordinating with Operation Hope, mutual housing, other organizations which are active in the community. Again, workforce housing, and the concept of universal design. And I think the goal we just talked about earlier, which is again, moratoria and exemptions. How can we get there? What can we do? So this section here could be moved up, become section 6.1 here overall.
Wait a second. I'm sorry, going back to page 46.
Yep.
You got to go back a few pages there.
Yep.
Yeah. That number 1, work towards being exempt from the, we're not going to be exempt. We can defer it, we can get a moratorium, but I just don't see any way we're ever going to be, at least not in my lifetime, we're ever going to be exempt. So
yeah, you could be right, Steve. I tried to word this delicately. Continue to work towards creating additional units, although an exemption may not be in the foreseeable future. So I think it's continuing the journey, even though the destination still seems far away. So I think I'll just make a note here to revisit this wording.
Okay. Thank you.
Then I created section 7 for implementation, just to sort of identify what we're doing here in the tables that preceded this. We're identifying the leaders and partners in terms of who's responsible for different elements. We're identifying some target dates in terms of what can happen here. And then I put together this table here, which identifies the work of the Affordable Housing Committee and what might happen in 2022, 2023, in terms of moving ahead. So for example, for the Affordable Housing Committee, just to review the Affordable Housing Affordability Plan, which is recommended for development, review and update the standard deed restriction, apply for our first 4-year moratorium, develop guidelines on how the Housing Trust Fund will be deployed in the future, and conduct the inventory of town-owned land and facilities, or update what we've already got. So I think this is spread out over the next 2 years, and I think it's manageable because the committee has been active in doing much of this. The challenge is in this area here, which is these are things which fall to the Planning and Zoning Commission. In the midst of them updating their zoning regulations and doing the POCD. But if they don't modify the regulations to encourage a higher percentage of affordable units or make perhaps some other changes in the regulations, I think we're going to continue to tread water in Fairfield with 830Gs and a 2.5% of our housing stock. It's going to be a challenge. So I think this becomes perhaps the challenge for us in Affordable Housing Plan 3.0. But I thought it was useful, Steve, to actually change the format here a little bit to say, okay, here's what's going to happen over the course of this affordable housing plan. The target dates are just that, targets, but Affordable Housing Committee is going to do this, and Planning and Zoning is going to do, or the Town Plan and Zoning Commission is going to do that. So that was my thought process here overall.
I think we've got 5 years on the plan, right?
Yep.
And there's only 2 or 3 years listed on the target dates.
Yep.
And again, I think if we can get 2 or 3 things done in the 5 years, we're not doing too badly. So I think we have to look again at these dates.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So my thoughts on listening to the discussion here tonight is that I think my reaction to your reaction is to start looking at how to put together an executive summary. I felt that much of the detail in this document was important, but I also think it's almost very deep into the weeds, and I think it needs to come back out to a higher level now. And I think that would involve creating what we've described as an executive summary here tonight, a shorter document, half the size of this document, maybe even shorter than that. And some of the elements would be distilled down. So just going back a couple of pages, for example, here, some fairly dense discussion about concepts or ideas that could be summarized more simply. And then this document could become the appendix to that. So that if you want more detail about continuing affordable housing efforts, it could be described more over here. So my thought process for the committee are sort of twofold. I think option one, come back to your February 9th meeting with a executive summary, which reduces the amount of detail and incorporates the comments and feedback here from this evening. Or the commission would like to think about some of these issues and have a special working session. We can go ahead and do that in 2 weeks and then meet in February again. The only other thing I want to put together for you, I think, is a schedule. I think June 1 is only 4.5 months away, actually, as it turns out. So the question is, how are we going to get to the finish line? Because we got to figure out who's adopting this document. Because we also need to, either the Affordable Housing Committee does it, or we need to get somebody else to go ahead and adopt this, in which case we have to complete the document and transmit it to them in time for them to meet the deadline. So we got to figure that out too. How would the committee like to proceed?
Well, first, as to who approves it and stuff, I'll leave that for you and Mark to work out.
Okay.
And I guess you have to work back from there to how much time we have and the public has to review the document and make comments. Okay. And I'm fine meeting again when you're ready to meet. And if that's in 2 weeks, fine. We can have a special session on just this. Or we could do it in 4 weeks.
We'll say, I have presented this to, or shared this document with planning and zoning staff. And staff have had a high-level conversation with planning and zoning commission leadership as to our interest in having an additional joint planning session sometime in March. They understand that some of the strategies and goals outlined in our plan rely upon, their efforts. In some respects, this is a good time in which to do that because, as Glenn referenced, the Planning and Zoning Commission is undertaking a comprehensive update to our plan of conservation development, as well as a very thorough rewrite of our zoning regulations. So in some respects, there's no better time to put forth some of these suggestions that require some changes to our regulatory framework within that context. So I don't think they're under any illusions that some of the strategies and action steps that we referenced in this report will require some work by the Planning and Zoning Commission.
So Mark, are you saying that you've already discussed the 11 goals for the TPZ that are outlined on page 49?
I've shared it with staff.
Yeah.
I don't believe the staff have had any substantive conversation with the commission or commission leadership, other than to indicate that we need to have a joint planning meeting prior to the plan going out to the public for public dissemination and plan adoption. So I think the Planning and Zoning Commission is comfortable with that, and they've talked about a March timeframe to do that.
Well, I'm in favor of giving them as much information as soon as possible. But if they wanted to meet in March before the document is released to the public, that doesn't give us any really real time to get comments and then make changes, I don't think. Because we're talking a March meeting, it gets out to the public in April. We're getting scrunched.
Well, I do think, there could be some further public engagement outreach throughout February and March that's creating more awareness around the planning effort that's currently underway, and introducing some of these strategies without necessarily committing the Planning and Zoning Commission to doing them before they've had a chance to weigh in. I think that's where I'm trying to be a little bit sensitive. I don't want to put something in the final draft report that the commission is absolutely diametrically opposed to, that has no chance of seeing the light of day.
I agree with you on that.
Not that I know of any, but until we actually talk to them, the commission, the staff have certainly reviewed it and thinks this is a worthwhile to put before the commission for their review.
Okay. Sounds good.
So the only thing I think I need, Mr. Chairman, is a consensus from the committee in terms of, are we getting together in 2 weeks or 4 weeks?
So are you saying, Glenn, that you could be ready in 2 weeks?
I believe my goal, Mr. Chairman, would be to incorporate the comments I heard here tonight and distill this document down more like an executive summary. So the question, in a sense, I guess I'm playing limbo. How low can I go in terms of the page count, but retain the essence of the document? Maybe not all of the detail to explain everything here, but that could become, this document could become more like an appendix, but get towards an executive summary. So my goal would be for our next meeting to make the adjustments based on our conversation and show you what a shorter document looks like. And then the commission can choose whichever document they wish to proceed with.
So Mark, could we do a call in 2 weeks for just an hour and devote it just to this?
Absolutely.
That's what I would prefer to do.
We can certainly put out a poll and see what dates might work for committee members and for Glenn, and then just schedule a special meeting. Not a problem.
Thank you. I would prefer to do that.
Wonderful. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the time the commission shared with me this evening. I realize I've taken up most of your agenda, so I'm going to stop talking and turn the screen back and let you guys finish up what you need and want to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.
It's very helpful and it's a good document. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hey, Mark, let's talk about the annual report.
Okay. We'll note, and I don't know if it went out to the full committee, but I will certainly append it to the minutes of this, comments received from, I think, Herb,
Yeah.
Bob, and Carrie, I think, from the Fairfield Senior Advocates that had some suggestions on the plan. So I will share that with the full.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I meant to mention that to Glenn, and I don't know if Glenn has gotten a copy of Herb's
I did. I
comment.
shared that. Yes.
Okay,
I did. I think the Herb comments came in on the day that I had issued the report to Mark. So I wasn't able to incorporate those right away. But I think in my efforts now to create an executive summary, I think I'm in a better position to go ahead and try to integrate Herb's comments, if that's okay with the. What you will get from me next is a revisions marking edition, which will show you changes made based on conversation. And I can incorporate Herb's remarks if that's okay with the committee.
those that are appropriate, that'd be fine. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, now on to the annual report. I think all of you have seen it. I hope. I don't know if I need to try to find something to share at this point, but rather than fumble around with that, because I didn't call it up. The first part of the annual report is just a summary of our work this past year, most of which was focused on the affordable housing plan update and the major components of that work that were completed. In addition to that, the consideration. Well, thank you, Glenn. Appreciate that. Thanks. It's hard to talk and do things at the same time. I'm not as multi-talented multitasker as you are.
Don't go there, buddy.
So, so then we also, within that, I didn't keep the statistical section. There is some information that, we're still relying upon ACS data from 2019, as the 2020 census data has not yet been released. That's the most recent available information. But I know committee members thought that that was helpful to retain as part of the report.
Really interesting.
Mhm.
That's really interesting. That little section is very.
And Steve, I'm relying upon your sales data that you
Yep.
provided. So hopefully that is
Mhm,
accurate. I didn't go to your source material.
mhm.
So Glenn, you want to scroll down more? Next page. I did provide an update on where we stand with respect to the moratorium. There is a change here that if you also saw my moratorium progress report, I made a modification to that report to show a minimum and maximum housing unit equivalency point value. And that's because some of these things are subject to some interpretation. The determinant is the Department of Housing, ultimately, although there is an appeals process if we don't agree with their point total. In this instance, I did have a substantive conversation with the deputy commissioner as it relates to the points associated with Pine Tree Lane. And I have a definitive point value, which is less than the maximum points that I had assigned to the project, which increases, unfortunately, the gap, but that is in fact how the Department of Housing is viewing the redevelopment of Pine Tree Lane. It's worth 78.5 points, which is a little less than what I had.
Why can't we challenge that?
We could when the time comes. It's a little bit of an academic exercise at this point, but I think sometimes I feel like I'm presenting too rosy a picture. So I think a truer picture would be to acknowledge the fact that there is some variables, some variation in the numbers associated with that. And that's what I try to do in the moratorium analysis, which shows the minimum maximum points estimated for each project. That's the most significant change. And then here also called out projects that are in progress, as noted before. Really, the only ones that are really going to impact our ability to attain a moratorium in the current year are those that are currently under construction, such as 78 Umpqua Place, which is much further along, probably will be CO'd this year. 528 Black Rock Turnpike is also under construction, but they haven't done anything besides form the foundation wall. So again, that looks to me like it's more of a 2023 completion date. We are required to provide an update on the Housing Trust Fund. This is updated as of 12/31/21. I've gone through those numbers pretty thoroughly. And so our current balance, or our balance as of the end of the 2021 calendar year, is around $100,000. So, we were the month before around 50, so it's gradually replenishing. We did have a lot of activity this year in terms of disbursements, which are noted there. And as we discussed, one of the ways in which we can most impact affordable housing development is to provide land for development or redevelopment purposes. So that's reflected here.
Well, Mark, how come you didn't add some language about the trust fund would be reimbursed once the housing development at Quincy is done?
It could be, but again, we do have a line of credit in essence by the RTM, Board of Finance, RTM have approved short-term borrowing for the project. So that essentially gives us some additional capacity. We haven't really tapped that as of yet. So all this has been cash disbursements out of the fund. Mm-hmm. If you look, to do something along the lines of what we were discussing in terms of a fairly low intensity development, duplexes, triplexes, along those lines in redeveloped Parkview Commons, the project, will not pencil out without additional subsidy. Now, it's possible we might be able to do that by getting the Department of Housing to provide financing for that project. But at this time, that's a little bit speculative. So we can certainly acknowledge that. I'm happy to wordsmith that with you, Steve, but that's why I was a little cautious in referencing that.
And so you're saying that if the project is done and done successfully, we would get some of the trust fund money back, but probably not all of it because additional subsidy is needed.
Yes, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay, good. And so, I'm okay just having a verbal discussion with the selectmen or RTM, or you can put a sentence in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything in any of the other sections that people would like to revise or have objections to? Anything I missed that we should include? Is there other, I mean, the last page, I think, was the inventory, which corresponds to the moratorium point. So this is only inventory that contribute housing unit equivalency points
Mhm.
and the points associated with each.
And we did away with the map because it just wasn't readable.
Well, I can certainly incorporate the map. Yeah, I think if you'd like to incorporate the map, I can do that.
I like the map if it's readable. If it's just too confusing, then I'm not sure it's helpful.
But did you find last year's map to be confusing?
I did not, but I've been looking at it for many years too. You know.
It's a very high level. Obviously, if we in the plan, if we do a 2-page spread, so an 11 by 17 page, you'll be able to provide a little bit more detail. So this is only an 8.5 by 11, so it's very high level. But what does the rest of the committee think? Is the map worthwhile keeping?
Like Steve said, only if it's able to be read.
Okay.
no,
Well,
I
how about
agree.
this? I'll share a copy with you, and you can let me know if you think it's readable.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think that's a good idea.
cool. Yeah, I agree.
So other than that, are we good to go on this?
And on the cover page, I noted both past as well as current committee members. So I wanted to note that there were other folks who contributed to the committee's work in 2021 that may have left, or other folks that have joined us. So I just wanted to call that out, if that's okay.
I thought that was good.
That's good.
Mark?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Glenn. Appreciate your help.
You're welcome.
Is there anything we need to do regarding Borough Street?
Is Carol still here? Yeah. Carol, I don't want to rain on your parade, but you've been hanging in there for all that time. I don't know if you'd like to share any news with regard to Bureau Street.
Well, the good news is both you folks, and thank you for your soft commitment letter. It is so appreciated. The good news is the Department of Housing has sent us a commitment letter, a conditional commitment letter, to come up with $1 million to help purchase the property that the church has had on the market now for quite some time. And so I have tried to schedule a meeting with Father Sean at St. Emery's, and we hope to line out the business terms now that we have both your soft commitment letter as well as Department of Housing to acquire the property. So more to follow, obviously, but let me just say from the heart and soul, I really appreciate you folks being willing to provide a soft commitment, because I suspect that was instrumental in getting the State Department of Housing to write their letter for $1 million. And, you know, this is a good story, and all of you should be commended for not only willing to support something of affordable housing over there, but more importantly, to put it in writing. So I just honestly want to say thank you from Fairfield Housing Authority and the Fairfield Housing Court.
And I will note that we did have the state legislative delegation. The first select woman had a meeting with the Commissioner of Housing. I was in attendance, as was Carol, where we discussed the project. So, you know, I think, again, we provided a letter that indicated that this is something we would certainly consider from a funding perspective, and was in line with our objectives and goals. And so I think, again, that was helpful in terms of getting the commission and the state's attention from a financing perspective. So thank you very much.
Yeah, good. And Carol, when you start your negotiations with the priest, remind him that you are also doing God's work. So he should he should be amenable to your requests.
And Stephen, amen.
Mark, anything else you want to touch on before we sign off?
Well, we rushed through everything, but I think the most important part was the conversation we had with regard to the plan. I think, again, we gave Glenn some direction there, and we can come back with some revisions to it, but I do think we should try to, again, spend some more time talking through the strategies and just figuring out, amongst the strategies that we've outlined, which ones do we want to put forth first? As you said, talk a little bit more about the schedule. We do have 5 years, and maybe we can figure out, again, through that work, where the emphasis is going to lie.
Let me just add one other thing, that on Friday, 1 o'clock, Herb and Carrie and I are going to be talking with Paul Harris, an architect in Westport, who had won an award for his design of accessory dwelling units. And so he said he'd be happy to talk with us about ADU design. And he also has an interest in workforce housing, standalone ADUs. And so if anybody else would like to join, I'm happy to send the invite to them as well. That is all.
All right. Well, I know we ran a little bit past time, but appreciate everyone's attention to this. I think we had a good conversation. So, Steve, I don't know if you had any more closing thoughts.
No, just thank you. And that's all.
All right. So we'll be adjourned at 9:07 p.m. if that's okay.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.